Imagine, my cousin reduced to serving drinks. Such shame to the family name. The words slipped from Sheikh Omar's lips with a smirk, carried just loud enough for the wealthy investors around him to hear. The chandeliered ballroom at the top of the Burj Khalifa glittered above them, its glass walls catching the lights of Dubai below, but Amelia's world felt suddenly very small. She steadied the silver tray in her hands as polite laughter rippled around the table, her fingers trembling but her eyes refusing to give Omar the satisfaction of a reaction. One of the investors leaned closer to Omar, murmuring in Arabic though not low enough to exclude Amelia's ears. She looks like she doesn't even belong here. Why keep her near? His gaze slid over Amelia with dismissive curiosity, as though she were less a person and more a stain on the room's polish. Omar answered without hesitation, bitterness in his tone. Her father was a disgrace. He married an Englishwoman, abandoned tradition, abandoned us. And now his daughter, serving tables for us. It is fitting, don't you think? Amelia's throat tightened. Every word struck like a whip across her back, but she kept her head bowed, setting down crystal glasses with the precision of someone who had learned to survive humiliation. Her heartbeat was loud in her ears, but she let no part of her face betray the storm building inside. Isabella, Omar's polished daughter, leaned back in her chair and let a smirk spread across her lips. As Amelia passed with the tray, Isabella's voice sliced through the air, mocking and sweet at once. Cousin, do you even understand what we're saying? Or is this all just noise to you? The table erupted in laughter again, Isabella's jeweled fingers tapping idly against her wine glass, as if Amelia were nothing more than a servant worth playing with. Amelia swallowed hard, the metallic taste of restraint on her tongue. She did not answer. She could not answer. Not here, not yet. But while Omar and Isabella entertained their guests with cruelty, Amelia's mind was not in the glittering ballroom. Hours earlier she had sat in the cold white corridors of Mediclinic City Hospital, staring at the pale face of her 16-year-old brother, Daniel. Machines beeped steadily beside him as doctors explained the impossible. His liver had failed, and he needed a transplant. The cost was 500,000 dirhams, an amount so vast it may as well have been the moon. Amelia had sat frozen, nodding as though she understood, while inside she wondered how a waitress could possibly hold on to her brother's life. Now, balancing the tray under golden lights, she clung to composure like it was oxygen. Her stepmother had vanished after her father's death, leaving Amelia and Daniel like discarded luggage. Her father, before the end, had left her only one weapon against the world, language. He had taught her Arabic with patience, insisting she would need it one day, though at the time Amelia had thought it useless. Tonight, that forgotten gift stirred in her like a pulse. The investors shifted the conversation. One of them pulled a thick folder from his briefcase, its pages heavy and formal. He slid it across the table toward Sheikh Omar, the sound of paper against polished wood echoing louder than it should have. Omar straightened, Isabella leaning in beside him with the expression of someone who wanted to appear intelligent. The investors exchanged subtle glances. They knew she couldn't read it. The contract was entirely in Arabic, dense with clauses and footnotes. Omar leaned toward Isabella, his whisper harsh but still audible to Amelia, who stood nearby with her tray. Just smile, Isabella. They won't know the difference. But the investors noticed. Their eyes, sharp and calculating, lingered on Isabella's hesitation. Her polished exterior began to crack under the weight of silence. Amelia's gaze flickered to the document as she refilled a glass of water. Her breath caught. She could read the words. More than that, she understood them. Buried in the elegant script were hidden traps, penalty clauses that would demand full repayment if the project failed, obligations that could bankrupt Omar if anything went wrong. She froze, the glass bottle in her hand suspended midair, her mind racing. Then came the insult that changed everything. One of the investors leaned back in his chair, lips curling with amusement as his eyes darted between Isabella and Amelia. You cannot read it, can you? He said with quiet disdain. His gaze shifted deliberately toward the waitress standing nearby. Maybe your cousin has sharper eyes. The laughter that followed was louder than before, a cruel chorus that burned in Amelia's ears. Omar's jaw tightened, fury flashing across his face. Isabella flushed crimson, her polished confidence reduced to ash. Amelia felt the sting of every chuckle as though it had been aimed directly at her skin. She could have walked away. She could have swallowed the insult as she had so many times before. But the memory of Daniel's pale face, the steady beep of his monitor, and the doctor's words about 500,000 dirhams roared inside her. Her father's voice echoed too, urging her not to fear knowledge, urging her to speak when silence would cost too much. Amelia steadied her tray on the table, her voice calm but firm as she spoke in flawless Arabic. The sound of it silenced the laughter instantly. "This clause here," she said, pointing with a trembling finger at a line of text. "It demands full liability if the project fails. Sheikh Omar, if you sign, you lose everything." For a heartbeat, the entire ballroom seemed to stop breathing. The investors froze, their eyes snapping to the page, then to Amelia. Omar stared at her as if he were seeing a ghost, his smirk erased, his power suddenly fragile. Amelia's chest rose and fell quickly, but she did not retreat. She had finally spoken, and the weight of truth hung in the air like thunder. One of the investors seized the contract, his brows knitting as he read the line Amelia had indicated. His face darkened, and his voice carried authority when he said, "She's right. This contract is a trap." Another investor murmured, his eyes still locked on Amelia. "If this waitress sees what your daughter cannot, perhaps we've been speaking to the wrong person." Omar's lips parted, but no words came. For the first time in years, the man who ruled rooms with arrogance found himself stripped of control, humiliated before those whose respect mattered most. Isabella lowered her gaze, the sparkle of her jewelry now only a reminder of her exposed ignorance. An investor leaned forward, his voice curious but softened by something like respect. "Who taught you to read like this?" Amelia felt the ache rise in her chest, but she steadied her voice. "My father. Before he died, he taught me every word, every number. He believed knowledge is wealth." The lead investor closed the folder slowly, the weight of the decision pressing into the room. His gaze never left Amelia as he spoke with quiet certainty. "We're willing to sign 100 million dirham investment, but only if you're part of the deal. We need someone honest." The sentence shattered the last of Omar's composure. His jaw clenched so hard it seemed his teeth might break. The empire he had built trembling beneath the humiliation of being replaced by the cousin he had mocked. Amelia's breath caught, her body torn between pride and fear. The words 100 million sounded impossibly vast, like a door to another universe. But then her mind conjured Daniel again, his fragile body waiting in that hospital bed, and she realized this was no longer about pride. It was survival. She hesitated only a moment longer before nodding, her voice low but firm. "I'll do it." The investors exchanged quick looks, satisfied, as one reached into his briefcase for the necessary documents. Omar remained frozen, his fury held only by the public setting. Isabella shifted uncomfortably, her face pale, her eyes darting anywhere but Amelia. "Very well," the lead investor said, pulling out a fresh letter. "Then we begin tonight." He set the paper on the table, his pen poised, but before writing his first word he turned back to Amelia and asked, "Do you fully understand what you are agreeing to?" Amelia drew in a deep breath, her mind racing through every consequence, every possibility, every risk. And yet, with Daniel's life pressing on her chest, she knew her answer had already been written inside her long before this night. She opened her mouth to reply, but, "Don't waste our time," Isabella interrupted, her smile sharp as glass. "Investors, please. My cousin enjoys attention, but she has no role here. You cannot be serious about involving her." Omar leaned toward Isabella, whispering with sharp venom, "If this waitress becomes part of the contract, we will not sign. This deal is worthless then." Isabella nodded, smirking, her fingers tracing the edge of the thick contract as if it were a puzzle she had already solved. "Yes, no respectable investor will tolerate her in the decision. She has no clue about high stakes." The investors, however, cut through the tension like a knife. Their voices were steady, unwavering. "We've continued these projects with you for years as your old partners." One began, his tone calm, but heavy with authority. "We've ignored your usual tricks and deceptions, but hiding penalties in clauses and using your daughter to mask failures is unacceptable. If Amelia is involved, she will see everything, the contract, your manipulations, your personal agenda. We will not proceed without her. Your daughter's inability to understand these clauses cannot jeopardize this project. She must be part of the deal if we are to continue, and only because we are long-time investors willing to see it through. Omar's face burned red, his lips pressed tight. Isabella's smug confidence faltered, and a quiet murmur spread through the room. Amelia's heart pounded in her chest, her hands tightening around the tray she carried, her mind racing. She had never imagined the stakes would reach such heights in a single evening. Her brother's surgery, the trust of the investors, the looming threat of failure. Everything pressed on her at once, yet she remained calm, breathing through it. One of the previously silent investors, a man in a tailored gray suit with sharp eyes, leaned forward, resting his palms on the table. Miss Amelia, if you are to be part of this deal, you will need to understand everything in this contract. Can you explain Clause 42? On the spot, in front of everyone. We need confidence that you are ready for this responsibility. The words fell like stones in the already tense room. All eyes turned toward her, expectant, measuring, waiting for her reaction. Amelia's throat tightened for a moment, but she remembered her father's voice, patient yet firm, guiding her through Arabic contracts at the dining table years ago. Knowledge is wealth, he had said. She had absorbed every lesson, every nuance of language and logic, long before life had tested her in real ways. She straightened her shoulders, lifted her chin, and nodded. Yes, I can explain it, she said, her voice steady though her pulse raced. Omar's eyes narrowed, a flash of panic crossing his face. He leaned toward a quiet aide, whispering rapidly, instructing him to subtly hide or rearrange some pages of the contract. Amelia, however, did not miss it. Her eyes flicked toward the corner of the table where a few sheets had been slightly shuffled. She held her breath, reading quickly, calculating. The clauses were slightly altered, a trap meant to confuse her and make her falter in front of the investors. Yet, years of careful study, discipline, and sheer necessity had prepared her for moments like this. She smiled faintly to herself. She would not be trapped. Omar's daughter, Isabella, tried to mask irritation with a delicate, condescending smile. Surely the investors don't expect a waitress to manage this. Why even let her try? Her words were sharp, dripping with disdain, meant to corner Amelia publicly. The investors, however, did not flinch. Their eyes were clear, assessing, as though they could see past Omar's arrogance into the truth of Amelia's abilities. Amelia stepped forward, placing the tray on a nearby side table. Clause 42, she began, her fingers tracing the margin as she spoke, details the allocation of liabilities if the project underperforms. It ensures that any silent partners or hidden conditions are accounted for, preventing losses from being unfairly transferred to the investors. The penalties embedded here would have caused the entire return to be absorbed by the primary stakeholders, and the contract's current arrangement, if signed without revision, would have allowed manipulation of these clauses for personal gain. Her words flowed naturally, without hesitation. Each sentence was precise, measured, demonstrating not only knowledge but her composure under pressure. The room went quiet. The investors leaned forward, flipping through the contract again, confirming her interpretation. Murmurs of approval circled the table. One of them said softly, "She explains better than most of the advisors we've employed at great cost." Another nodded, muttering under his breath, "We might be speaking to the wrong generation of this family entirely." Omar's fists clenched under the table. He leaned toward Isabella, whispering urgently, "You see? She's stealing the show. You cannot let them trust her over us." Isabella's hand tightened on the edge of the contract, her lips pressed thin. Yet even her poised composure faltered. She could see the admiration and confidence Amelia was inspiring. The investor who had challenged her continued, probing. "And what about the penalty triggers? Explain who bears the cost if the silent partner demands reimbursement." Amelia's eyes moved over the pages swiftly, noting every clause Omar had attempted to tweak. "The penalties are clearly assigned to the manipulator," she replied, "not the investors. Any attempt to hide responsibilities within the contract would be automatically triggered under Clause 42, protecting all rightful stakeholders. Omar's adjustments would have failed the transparency test and exposed any falsification, making it legally enforceable against him personally." A soft, impressed murmur spread across the room. One of the senior investors, an older woman with gray-streaked hair and keen eyes, leaned forward, tapping her finger on the table. We've been following this carefully. If Amelia were not present, this manipulation might have gone unnoticed. Her ability to read and respond under pressure proves she is indispensable for this deal. Omar's lips quivered slightly. You're exaggerating. She's a child. He hissed in Arabic, the word sharp, meant only for Isabella and himself. No adult would take her seriously in a business of this magnitude. Isabella shook her head subtly, fear and doubt mingling with defiance, realizing her father's arrogance might be his downfall tonight. The meeting ended not with a toast, not with applause, but with papers shuffled, signatures promised, and eyes still locked in quiet tension. Omar and Isabella retreated in cold silence, their pride dented but not broken. The investors, however, lingered. They weren't in a rush to leave, not after what had just unfolded. One of them, a tall man with silver at his temples, stepped closer to Amelia as the others gathered their briefcases. His voice carried a weight that silenced the room. You did not just save a contract tonight, he said softly, his gaze steady on her. You saved our confidence. Few people would have spoken as you did, especially against their own family. Amelia felt her throat tighten. The words settled deep, more powerful than any applause could have been. She swallowed, unsure if she should bow her head or thank him. Her voice came out quieter than she intended. I only said the truth. Truth, he echoed, almost smiling, though the lines around his eyes remained sharp. Rare in rooms like these. That's why we want you with us. His hand brushed the table as he straightened. Then another investor, younger but just as sharply dressed, approached her with something in hand. It was an envelope, sealed with their firm's insignia, its edges crisp and deliberate. This, he said, offering it to her, is a token, an advance. 1 million dirhams. Use it well. For a heartbeat, Amelia thought she had misheard. The number sounded unreal, almost absurd when spoken aloud. Her fingers hesitated before closing around the envelope, its weight solid, undeniable. It didn't feel like money. It felt like responsibility. She pressed it to her chest, blinking back the sting of tears that burned at the corner of her eyes. Thank you, she whispered, her voice breaking despite her effort to stay composed. The eldest investor placed a steady hand on her shoulder. His touch was firm, grounding. Don't thank us. Earn it. Prove that our faith in you is not misplaced. That night, Amelia didn't go home. She couldn't. Home had become too heavy, too filled with questions and disappointments. Instead, she went straight to the hospital, where the dull smell of antiseptic mixed with the quiet hum of machines. The lobby lights were harsh against her tired eyes, and the weight of the envelope inside her purse felt like a lifeline she was barely holding on to. Her younger brother, Daniel, lay pale and fragile under the relentless glow of fluorescent lights, his body dwarfed by the machines that surrounded him. Monitors traced every weak heartbeat, every fragile breath. He looked smaller than he ever had before, as if the illness had stolen years from him in weeks. The head surgeon, a man with sharp eyes and a tired voice, met her outside the ward. His coat was neat, but the shadows beneath his eyes spoke of endless nights and difficult choices. He studied her the way he studied every case, with skepticism. Open-heart surgery of this scale requires 500,000 dirhams, he said flatly, as though daring her to flinch. Do you understand the risk? Complications are high, recovery uncertain. Some patients don't leave this hospital. Amelia drew in a steady breath. She had heard enough cold facts over the last few months. She didn't need another lecture. She needed hope. She reached into her purse and placed the deposit slip in his hand, her fingers steady despite the tremor in her chest. I understand, she said, her voice low but unwavering. Do it. Save him. For a moment, the surgeon simply looked at her, as if weighing her courage. Then he nodded once, curtly, and turned to his team. Within minutes, papers were signed, protocols initiated, corridors filled with brisk footsteps, and the metallic rattle of surgical trays. As the doors to the operating room closed, Amelia sank into a hard plastic chair in the waiting hall. The envelope was empty now, its weight transferred to the hospital, to the operating table where her brother's future lay. She bent forward, resting her head in her hands. She hadn't prayed in years, but tonight her lips moved silently, whispering words she had long forgotten how to say. Hours bled into hours. The hospital's sterile white corridors swallowed time, leaving only the anxious rhythm of footsteps and the low murmur of nurses exchanging clipped words. Occasionally, a nurse would emerge, eyes unreadable, disappearing again before Amelia could muster the courage to ask. Her legs grew stiff, her throat dry, but she did not move. It was near dawn when the surgeon finally appeared. His mask was lowered now, his gloves faintly stained with the invisible weight of battle fought beneath the glaring lights. His expression was guarded, his posture heavy. Amelia stood immediately, though her knees nearly gave way beneath her. Her voice cracked with urgency. "Well, please tell me." The surgeon exhaled slowly, his eyes softening for the first time that night. "He made it. The procedure was successful. There will be a long recovery ahead, but your brother, he will live." The words crashed over her like a wave she hadn't prepared for. Amelia's hand flew to her mouth as the tears she had fought for hours finally broke free. She sank into the nearest chair, her entire body trembling with the sudden weight of relief. Inside the ward, Daniel's chest rose and fell beneath the steady rhythm of the machines, stronger now, steadier. His face remained pale, but his breaths were no longer shallow gasps. They carried promise. For the first time in months, Amelia allowed herself to hope. The staff noticed her quiet vigil. A young nurse, her hair tucked neatly under a cap, approached with a kind smile. "Your brother is lucky," she said softly. "Not everyone has someone who fights this hard for them." Amelia shook her head, her voice still hoarse from tears. "I only did what anyone would." But the nurse's eyes lingered, knowing better. Not anyone. Most people would have given up. As the hours passed and Daniel remained stable, more staff members began to stop by, offering nods of respect or quiet words of encouragement. Some had seen her pacing the corridors night after night. Others had heard the whispers of her confrontation at Burj Khalifa. A cleaner pushing a mop paused, giving her a gentle nod. "May God bless you, miss. Your courage, it gives hope even to us." The appreciation startled her. She wasn't used to being seen, to being acknowledged for anything more than mistakes. And yet here, in this sterile hospital filled with exhaustion and broken families, her determination stood out like light in a darkened hall. Later that morning, as Daniel slept in his recovery bed, Amelia stepped out into the hospital courtyard. The city was waking beyond the walls, sunlight piercing the skyline, traffic buzzing like a reminder that the world hadn't stopped even when hers almost had. She clutched the empty envelope, remembering the weight it once carried, and the promise she had silently made. The investor's words replayed in her mind. "Don't thank us. Earn it." She realized then that tonight had not been an ending. It was a beginning. A door had been forced open, and through it lay a path filled with expectation, scrutiny, and risk. Her family's betrayal had nearly buried her, but the investor's trust and her brother's fragile survival had pulled her back to her feet. She returned to Daniel's side just as he stirred, his eyes fluttering open. Weak, unfocused, but alive. She leaned close, whispering so only he could hear. "You're safe now, and I promise you this. No one will ever take away what we've fought for tonight." The machines hummed steadily, his breaths syncing with their rhythm. Amelia sat back, holding his hand gently in hers, her resolve hardening with every passing second. This was not just about saving her brother anymore. It was about proving that the truth she had spoken in that boardroom, the courage she had carried through humiliation, was only the beginning of who she was becoming. And as the first rays of sunlight stretched across the hospital window, Amelia knew, whatever trials lay ahead, she was ready to face them. Amelia's journey was not just survival. It was proof that dignity and honesty can change destinies. If her story moved you, don't just keep it to yourself, share it. Hit like to let us know you're with us. And subscribe so you never miss the next story that could inspire your own.